Hello and welcome back for even more photography fun. In this video I'm going to continue working with the deep sheet, but this time I will show you an example of how to use it. I am using some work from a past student, so thank you very much to her for allowing me to do this. The way I'm going to do it is I'm going to start off by writing it to the standard of a 3 and then demonstrate how the deep sheet allows you to progress all the way up through the grades. So just very quickly, I'm going to familiarise you with this project. This project was called Choice of Colour, and the student in question chose to focus on food. Here's her mind map. She completed four very nice pieces of research. There's one here by this artist, and then amongst other things she completed a contact sheet on this artist. So we can see here the artist drops fruit and vegetables into water, so in her contact sheet she has done that. And then you can see what she did was select some of her best photos to be written about as her experiments. Not all your experiments need to come from a contact sheet. Sometimes they might be standalone experiments that you kind of did on your own. Other times they will come from a contact sheet. To help me do this, I am of course going to use a deep sheet. Here's a little tiny one which expands into a bigger one. Okay, so we can see in the first box it says describe your intentions, and the first question is asking me what you're trying to show or create. Well, obviously looking at the artist here, we can see we're trying to create patterns of bubbles or splashes. Good start. What was the purpose of doing this? So sometimes this will be more straightforward, other times the answer might be a little bit more abstract, which means it's kind of more your opinion or something you feel rather than something based on fact. In my opinion, adding them into water with the splash, that kind of action, it does make the fruit and vegetable look a lot more exciting. So something that's quite normal, quite dull, that we see around the house or in shops has suddenly been brought to life by putting it in an unusual setting and showing it in a really creative and artistic way. So how shall I write that? Making them appear more exciting. Finally, for 3, what equipment, skills or techniques did you use? And it says I can use bullet points. Alternatively, if you took a picture of your setup, as this student did, you can also include that if that helps clarify things that you used. So what I'll do, I'll put that image there. Okay, and there we are. That's the first section complete. And that already looks pretty good. So if you are working at a 3 and you don't find that too tricky and you want to move on to the 4, I would encourage you to do that because that is of course the chance to shine task. I know some of you are going to be wondering how often you need to use this sheet. I wouldn't expect you to use it for every experiment. That's too much, that's excessive. I would like you to use it at least 3 times. It just shows that you can be consistent and coherent, so, make sense, when you discuss your experiments. Another thing worth pointing out is that you can use this sheet to help with your contact sheets as well. Okay, so if ever you're unsure what to write with them, you can use the DEEP sheet to help with that also. I'm now going to move on to the second section, so this is for a 4 or above. It says explain your reasons and decisions. So it says what inspired you to do this? Well, obviously it was my research in the style of this guy. And you can see it's already in the title. Make sure you put it in the title so it's really clear. And we can start writing that now. So capital letters for names. If I didn't have an artist, if I hadn't been able to find an artist name, then I would just simply call it something like Splash Fruit Photography. Okay? Second question, how does this link to your theme? This links to my theme of, so in this case, food. So this links to my theme of food. So why does it link to my theme of food? I mean, I could repeat myself and say something about making the fruits and vegetables look more exciting, but there is no point in repeating yourself. You don't achieve anything by doing that. So we need to think up an alternative point or a different reason as to why this links to my theme. I'm actually going to go back to the mind map to help me do this. So contrast, we could talk about the contrast perhaps between the water and the fruit. We could talk about the texture, so the texture between the skin or the outside of the vegetables versus the texture of the water. We could talk about selective colour, the fact that the water is colourless and yet you have this bright object landing in it, which is the fruit or vegetables. Okay, so by looking at my mind map, I now have lots of things I can write about. I can also look at my research for ideas, so I can see here the student has talked about the saturation, the brightness, or the presentation of the fruit and colour of food, because the shape and colour of the food, so I can remove food from there. So notice how I'm going back and checking what I've written and making corrections. Isolated and in stark contrast to the dull and transparent water. Lastly, can you explain any examples of symbolism, message, or hidden meaning? Okay, now again, this one can be quite tricky, but I am asking you to provide an example in your opinion. So you don't need to worry about facts. You don't need to worry about whether someone else is going to agree. You're just simply identifying something that you believe you can see within your own work. So when I think about fruit or vegetables, I think about healthy eating. When I think about water, I think about life or things growing. So it could almost be like a circle of life, perhaps. So, water is needed for the fruit and veg. So what you really need to do is think carefully about your work and just be imaginative and try and think about things and what they could possibly mean. So I'm going to start with, in my opinion. So that's a 4 done. And if you are a 4 and you wish to move on to a 5, then it's only 4 more questions. Okay, once again, this is looking pretty good. I've written some good stuff. I've got some keywords in. I've shared some of my own personal thoughts or imagination in attaching a meaning or a message. I'm doing a really good job here, okay? And the next step is going to be evaluate your findings. So what problems did I encounter or find? To help me do this, I'm actually going to go back to my contact sheet where you can see all of the images, and I'm just going to look for some things that caused me some problems. I can see over here she had a bit of trouble with the lighting, so that's something I could write about. I can see some of the fruit and vegetables didn't really create the sort of splashes that she wanted. I can also see she was limited a bit by the size of the fish tank. If she'd had access to a larger fish tank, she probably could have done something maybe a little bit more ambitious. So again, by taking a step back and looking at my previous work, I can think of some extra things I can write about. So what problems did you encounter? I'm now looking at the next question, which says, how did you resolve this? Well, I don't think she did resolve that. So actually what I'm going to do is be a little bit sneaky. And I'm actually going to add another problem, which I can answer easily. And then I'll come back to this problem in a minute. So remember I said about lighting? Well, I'm going to say I also had some trouble with the lighting and flash settings. Now that's a much easier one to answer when I'm asking myself, how did I resolve these? Okay, so I resolved the lighting issues by taking test photos and experimenting with different camera settings, and then I'll give an example of reducing the ISO and the aperture. And if we look at the contact sheet, you can see that is what happened. She had trouble with the lighting, and then she took alternative test photos and she resolved that. The next question, how successful was this piece of work? I think she did really well. This was her first time using the fish tank. I think she got some brilliant photos. I do think they could be improved by using Photoshop, but on the whole, I don't think she was disappointed at all with what she'd achieved. Okay, so I've written, I was really pleased with the results, considering I was developing new skills. Okay, no one expects you to be an expert straight away. We do expect you to make mistakes, that's not a problem. The important thing is that you're able to recognise them and suggest reasons or opportunities to fix them in the future. That is what we want to see, that is a good thing. Mistakes aren't bad if you're able to recognise them and improve on them in the future. Okay, the final question for the 5. Could you have done anything differently to get better results? Well, this is where I am going to talk about the fish tank. So I understand there's not much she could do about that, but in an ideal world, that is what she would like. She'd like a much bigger fish tank to give her more room to work. So this is where you can kind of write a bit more like a wish list, or you can answer it as in an ideal world, I would have liked. Okay, so these aren't necessarily things that you can control. It's just you acknowledging or recognizing things that would have made it better. So I'm actually going to start this sentence with in an ideal world. Okay, so I've written, in an ideal world, I would have access to a larger fish tank, which would allow me to include additional objects. And then in brackets I've written, for example, more ambitious splashes and compositions. So I'm just putting in an extra keyword and just backing up with a couple of examples. Okay, so that's the 5 done, so we can now move on to the 6, 7. I don't think any of this has been too bad so far, and this one shouldn't take long. So, plan your next steps. Which of these will you do next to continue developing your theme? So we have research or experiments or photos. So again, I'm going to look back at some past work. I think her research is actually very good. And I did say at the start she had other pieces of research also. So her doing even more research probably isn't really going to have that much impact at this stage. I think she'd be much better off doing even more experiments, taking even more photos, and becoming more confident at using those flash and lighting settings. Okay, and again, with a task like this, the more photos you take, the more chance you are of getting those really good action shots. Okay, so I'm actually not going to suggest more research. I'm going to suggest more experiments and more photos. Okay, and that's why I've given you options there, because I know it won't always be the case that you would do all 3. Okay, so I started with, to continue developing my theme, I will need to. So to begin this paragraph, I've written to continue developing my theme, I will need to, and I'm going to write this as 2 numbered points so that it's really clear that these are things I'm going to do in the future and the order in which I'm going to do them. So, first one, experiment. Okay, experiment. So what has this student not yet done? Well, she hasn't tried chopped up fruit. That'd be quite cool. Chucking in loads of chopped up bits of orange rather than just a whole orange. Okay, so try adding chopped or cut fruit and veg for different patterns of splash. And we also said she could take more photos. I did notice the artist tended to use a black background and they appear to have photoshopped these, removing any kind of marks on the glass or bubbles. When I look at her work, she hasn't really used a black background and I can see lots of things like, well, marks on the glass and bubbles. If I enlarge this, you'll see what I mean. Okay, so I wonder if in Photoshop we could kind of remove some of these areas here. And maybe even like a bit of black plastic on the bottom of the fish tank. That might have been good. Okay, it's something worth considering anyway. Okay, so I've written, in future photos, ensure the glass is clean, remove any excess drips or bubbles, and use a black background like my artist. Okay, so 3 very realistic things that she can do to improve the quality of her photos. Okay, so there we have it. We've completed all 4 of the written tasks, the D, E, and P. Okay, it looks something like this. It's approximately 5 paragraphs in your short list. The only thing left is the shine task for the 8+, which I'll show you in a moment. And for that, I'm going to move this out of the way. So here is my sketch or plan for the next photo shoot. I've used red arrows to indicate the 4 key changes that I will introduce, and they are the extra lighting, sliced fruit, deeper water for better splashes, and black background. And there you have it, the finished slide. And just to remind you of the difference between these, we started off with this section for A3. We added this paragraph for A4, this paragraph for 5, this paragraph for 6, 7, and we added our plan, bringing it to an 8 or more. Hopefully you now feel confident in using the DEEP sheet and can use that to improve the quality and depth of your experiment annotation. Remember, you don't need to use this sheet for all experiments, that's excessive. Instead, I'm expecting you to use it 3 times. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video.